You're listening to the Really Useful Podcast. We're the tech podcast for technophobes. My name's Christian Corley, and with me this week is Gavin Phillips. Welcome back, Gavin. How are you doing?
Yes, very well, Christian. Looking forward to the holiday period starting, kids off school, and all the good stuff that comes with that. How about yourself?
You're pretty much the same. Getting on top of work so I can take some time off. And although this podcast will launch in the 13th, 14th, 15th, it's probably the 16th this week, the 15th or 16th of December, this podcast is going to drop. And usually at Christmas time, we stop. But I've actually got two more podcasts in the bag that will go out next week, just before Christmas, and the week after, just before New Year. So that's kind of exciting, isn't it? First time we've done that.
Yeah. Keeping on the air during the Christmas period. Nice.
Yes, absolutely. And I've spoken to Gavin and various other guest hosts of the Really Useful Podcast, and we'll hear what they have to say about various topics in those shows. Now, this week, we're talking about a very particular topic, namely
the dark web.
Dun, dun, dun.
Absolutely. And it is a topic that you've probably heard of from reading newspapers, watching the news. You might have seen it mentioned on Facebook. It might be something that gives you particular cause for concern because it sounds dangerous and dirty and dank and unattractive and unappealing and somewhere that you shouldn't go to. And in some ways that is true, but in other ways that is kind of the normal web as well. So now I'm someone who's only dabbled with darkness. Sounds like an Iron Maiden track, doesn't it? I'm someone who's only dabbled with the dark web. Gavin, you know a little bit more about it than I do. So I think for our listener who is a technophobe or is more inclined to be phobic than the opposite, the dark web, is it as bad as it sounds?
I think, as you alluded to there, Christian, you're absolutely right. It's a bit of a mixed bag. There's a lot of stuff on the dark web that you wouldn't want to run into. But one of the common misconceptions of the dark web is that as soon as you log into the dark web, you're going to be confronted with all manner of horrific content, and you won't be able to avoid some of the more nefarious sides of the dark web. When in fact, the more horrific stuff that you do hear about in the news and what have you do have to kind of more search it out, if you see what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
And then a lot of that really nasty stuff is actually hidden behind login walls and paywalls and what have you. It's not like it's there as a free service that people are giving away. You have to create accounts. You may have to be invited to even create an account on a specific service by an existing user. So you're not going to be immediately confronted with all this horrific stuff. That is not to say that it isn't there, and that's also not to say that if you went looking for it, you probably would find it, if you see what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of the dark web, you can't access it through your normal browser. That's one of the saving graces.
Yeah.
Your regular internet browser, Google Chrome, Microsoft Edge, etc., doesn't have the correct configuration to access the websites on the dark web. That's because the dark web is what's known as an overlay network. It's a network on top of a network. You can only access it using special software. The most common bit of software that most people use is called the Tor browser, which is for the Onion router. And websites on the dark web, again, they don't use the same configuration as the websites on the regular internet. So the regular internet, you type in facebook.com and it whooshes you through to facebook.com using what's called the domain name system. We're not going to get into that, but that's what it's called. If you want to look that up yourselves, then there's some good reads on makeuseof.com. But if you tried that in the Tor browser, well, it would take you to the regular website, facebook.com, but onion addresses don't look like, facebook.com or makeuseof.com. Onion addresses are 16 characters long, and in those 16 characters, there's 32 possible character combinations for each individual character, which means there are 1 septillion, 208 sextillion, 925 quintillion, 819 quadrillion, and so on, potential onion addresses.
Wow. That's a lot.
It is a lot. It's a substantial amount. But of those addresses, most of them aren't in use. And
Sure.
of the addresses that are in use, most of them are hosting garbage. Just people have thrown up something that only needs to exist for 12 hours a day, for a week at a time. Or it's hosting something extremely private, specific to a single person. They're hosting a service or a server that only they are using. So a lot of stuff on the dark web isn't accessible by anyone other than the owner of the service.
The dark web itself, why is it called the dark web? What is dark about it? Is it evil or is it just hidden?
Well, the name dark web definitely comes from the fact that it's hidden. It's off the map. I guess you could infer that it is a bit evil from the name. It's definitely in the name, and it has a strong association with hackers, and you hear about the online markets selling all manner of nefarious types of goods. And as I was saying before, they definitely do exist. They're there, and you can find them yourselves. But that's not the reason it's called the dark web.
There are various websites on the dark web, as you say, and some are good and some are bad. Now, if you're going to go to the trouble of accessing the dark web, then you should probably be armed with a bit of foreknowledge of what you're going to look at. As Gavin alluded to, there are websites on the dark web that are equivalent to those on the ClearNet part of the web, the sort of the everyday internet. And we've got a nice list of them. They're the best dark websites you won't find on Google. There's a list that we've produced here. You'll find it in the show notes alongside everything else that we discuss in the Really Useful podcast. And I'm just going to run through them quickly. There is the Hidden Wiki, which is a wiki site. Very, very useful to have access to that. And it tells you quite a lot of interesting information. There's Facebook. There is Soylent News. There's ProPublica, another news outlet. There's DuckDuckGo. Everyone should be using DuckDuckGo. In fact, we should really do a really useful podcast just about DuckDuckGo, because the way DuckDuckGo can revolutionize your privacy is never overstated enough. Galaxy 3, which is another social network. Hidden Answers, which is a kind of a question and answer site. There's many of them on the internet. Mail2Tor, which is an email system. Onion Domain, which lets you host your own Onion website. And Tor Links, which is an alternative to the Hidden Wiki. And these are 10 dark web websites that you will probably find useful. However, it's arguable that you may not actually want to use the dark web because, well, most of the stuff that you do want to use, you're already using, and it's in the nice, happy, bright outside version of the internet in sunlight. Isn't that right?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the biggest draws of the dark web for many people is that it affords you extra privacy while browsing. So in the example we've been using for Facebook, so you've got Facebook on the open ClearNet, facebook.com, and then you have Facebook, which exists on the dark web, on the Tor network, and it has its own Onion URL, as we were saying earlier. You can read that in the article that Christian was just referencing. I'm not going to read it out because it's a bit of a jumble. And the difference is that if you were, say, in a country that had heavily restricted internet access, you could fire up the Tor browser and go to the Onion URL of Facebook and access Facebook through that, because Tor network is largely free of government censorship. So you could download the browser and access Facebook and find your friends or updated news that may be being censored in that country. There's similar services as well. So like the BBC News has an Onion address, and as Christian said there in the article there, ProPublica has a ClearNet address as well, but they also run this Onion site so that people can access it from wherever in the world and be free of government censorship.
We're obviously interested in censorship and the avoidance of it. Is the dark web, is that less of a destination for criminal enterprises and more a destination for people trying to avoid government censorship?
I think, yeah, in the last few years, it's definitely grown as we've seen, various governments around the world try and censor their citizens, especially in places where, when there is a government uprising from the citizens, they tend to switch certain parts of the internet off. You saw in Turkey a few years back, didn't they? They tried to censor Google and censor Facebook, so people were writing different DNS addresses on the walls, and people were also sending messages around advising people to use Tor browser because they could escape the censorship that was trying to be levied.
The dark web
is otherwise pretty easy to access, but it's probably wise to do it anonymously and safely if you are going to go down that route, because there are ways of being identified on the dark web if you're just going straight in and then using a network that you already use. I mean, if you're going to use Facebook on the dark web, you're going to sign into Facebook, aren't you? So, I mean, at least Facebook themselves, they know that you're accessing Facebook via the dark web, don't they?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And that's a really big common misconception with the dark web Tor browser. But that's also a misconception that extends to VPNs as well.
Yeah.
People think that as soon as you turn on your VPN, you're completely anonymous to the world. And while it does provide a degree of anonymity, if you sign into Facebook or if you post a tweet or whatever, those networks still know it's you. The only difference is they don't know exactly where you are. That's the big difference. It's still you making the tweet or posting about your cats on Facebook or whatever. So, and that's the same for the dark web. You can log into these services. The only difference is it won't be traced back to you sitting at your computer in your house.
So there are various ways to access the dark web safely and anonymously. Again, the links to this list will be in the show notes. So start by using a VPN to access the dark web. That's the first thing that you should do. Various VPN services will provide dark web access, ExpressVPN and CyberGhost among them. You should also download the Tor browser from the official Tor browser website. This may not be possible in the situation that Gavin mentioned earlier on. If there is like a government clampdown and internet services disconnected, you may find that the Tor browser's official location isn't reachable, which is probably a good reason to have it installed just in case, or at least have it downloaded to your system. It's available for Windows, it's available for Mac, it's available for Linux. I believe there's a version for Android as well. You should take standard security precautions that you would normally use when using the internet. Don't give too much away, don't engage in conversation with people, don't sign into accounts, and also it's also wise to close other apps on your machine and stop unnecessary services from running. You can install something called Tails, which is the Amnesiac Incognito Live system. It's a Debian-based version of Linux that you basically launch from a USB stick or DVD, and it's a sort of like a single session activity. Everything you do on it is immediately deleted and forgotten about. That's useful. And number 5, you should know where you're going while you're using it. Our list that we gave you earlier, and using the hidden wiki in particular, can help you get started in the deep web and using Tor, and the dark web, and using Tor. And the cryptocurrency for all your transactions is a wise thing to do. Now I mentioned that, I was going to save it for later, but what is the difference between the deep web and the dark web, Gavin?
Oh, yeah, that's another really common misconception, because the words for a long time were used sort of interchangeably in the news, which created quite a bit of confusion. So the deep web actually refers to sites whose contents aren't indexed by search engines. So think stuff like academic databases, scientific reports, medical records, legal documents, things like that. Stuff that you can only get to if you are part of the service, signed up to the service. So for medical records, it'd be stuff that's is available online, but only if you are a medical professional and you can log into the service and what have you. So that's the deep web, and the deep web makes up a unfathomably large amount of the internet. It's tens of times larger than the clear net. It's just terabytes of information, but it's useless to most people if you have no reason to look at it. And so then the dark web, as I was saying earlier, is an overlay network, and it refers to the series of anonymous websites that exist together within that specific network.
Cool, thank you. Now, it's also probably worth noting, and we've danced around it. It is a dangerous place, the dark web, in terms of the content that is available there. There are hackers that you probably know about in the world, and they make a living from invading accounts, stealing accounts. We're talking about bank accounts, PayPal accounts, company accounts, all sorts of methods that can be used for making money. Now, these accounts, they might be bought and sold and traded on the dark web. So you've probably heard of an occasion when, say, an airline or a bank or a real estate company, mortgage company, have had vast numbers of customer accounts stolen. What happens is, in these situations, and situations where a single individual has had their credit card details stolen, these are compiled into databases, and they're then traded between gangs, individuals who have dishonest aims. There are many ways in which accounts can be sold on the dark web, and we have got a great list of what you should be aware of. I mean, the dark web is where these things take place. These transactions take place. So financial and personal accounts, email accounts, even just standard email accounts, dating profiles, compromised Netflix accounts and similar services, adult website accounts, PayPal accounts. These can all be bought and sold on the dark web. Now, there's nothing you can do about this unless you have dishonest aims yourself, but you can stop your accounts from being sold by ensuring as best you can that your details are kept secure. Now, obviously, if your data is stored with a third party, keeping them secure is going to be a little bit trickier, but ensuring you're using a secure password and using two-factor authentication to make sure that you are aware of when your accounts are being accessed. Notifications that you can set up, email and text message alerts, for instance, can also help. I mean, this whole buying, selling marketplace of data, this is one of the key bogeyman news item things about the dark web that people know about already, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. With the amount of data breaches we see and the volume of them, the sheer scale of them is quite difficult to imagine as well. I had a good fact that I can't remember exactly, so I'm going to butcher it for the sake of this. I think it was something like the English version of Wikipedia is only 15 or 20 gigabytes in total size. And you think of all the information that's available on Wikipedia, but you hear about these data breaches that run into hundreds of gigabytes in size.
Ooh.
But most of the entries in these data breaches are just very small text files that contain, your name, your date of birth, your passport number, your social security number, a very, very, very small amount of text that takes up a few kilobytes. So when you extrapolate that into the size of hundreds of gigabytes, you realize quite how many records these are holding on you. So when they say a data breach has happened and they have found traces of the data breach on the dark web, it's that someone has taken all of those records, hundreds, if not millions of records, and has put them up on a hacking forum. And there are a lot of these types of hacking forums underground, and they're just up for sale to the highest bidder. And it's not even always the highest bidder. It's just you can just buy a copy of it.
Yeah.
So anybody can buy a copy of it if you've got the money. They get passed around quite easily.
It's very, very worrying. We obviously put a lot of trust in financial institutions, governments to protect the data that they have on us. But quite often, certainly, I don't want to make any generalizations here, but governments are more inclined to take the cheapest option for technical support and security steps being taken. Whereas I think private companies are more inclined these days towards paying money to protect the data because down the line it's going to lead to disaster that could basically kill the business. It is, I think, sad that we don't have more access, more control over our data. But I think, we may get away from the point of the podcast, but I think it's probably relevant with other podcasts that we've done recently. Is blockchain technology something that can help standard users keep their data protected, or at least keep notified about the condition and the location of their data?
In some ways it could, yeah. But I think as far as keeping hold of your data that's already out there, it's going to be hard to translate that onto a technology like blockchain. And using blockchain as an all-encompassing term is tricky, but there are services like Civic, which is it's like a personal identification blockchain, and you can use it to you put your credentials on the blockchain, and whenever you say would sign up for a service online, it would validate your credentials one-to-one between your app and the blockchain itself, and there'd never be any reason for you to have to put in your credentials fresh on another site and yet another site and yet another site, as you have to do these days. So as a practical application, that it is really good, but the technology just isn't quite there yet for like mass rollout for people.
So Gavin, we've covered various aspects of the dark web, and we have kind of danced around this topic a little bit, the good and the bad of the dark web. There's various misconceptions about the dark web.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the dark web myths are kind of rampant, really, aren't they? The tales of, well, I don't want to get into the really horrific myths that you hear about. I guess we'll start off with a really easy one.
Okay.
One of the biggest myths is that accessing the dark web is illegal. And that in itself is a myth. The dark web is illegal. However, in certain countries around the world, the use of encrypted technology, such as the Tor browser, is illegal. So you could fall foul of that. So China is a prime example of that. Tor browser and the Tor network is banned in China. If you use it there and you're caught, you could get into trouble. And similar situations in Turkey, Iraq, North Korea, places with questionable government records. Another common misconception is that all cybercrime takes place on the dark web, which is interesting as well, because the ClearNet itself, the regular internet, is massively bigger than the dark web.
Yeah.
Way more crime takes place on the regular internet than the dark web ever could. The crime that takes place on the dark web is, I would say, is far more specific and specialized in terms of, on the clear web, you're more likely to run into things like, phishing scams, malware, things like that. Whereas cybercrime on the dark web, it's more like the sale of illicit goods and that sort of stuff.
Well, it's not even a practical comparison, is it? Because if all the cybercrime took place on the dark web, there would hardly be any cybercrime.
Yes, exactly, because the number of users on the dark web, again, is really small. For all of the press that it gets when bad things happen, the number of users is still only in the millions. A few million. It's really a very small number compared to the billions of people on the regular internet.
Sure.
I guess that one sort of leads into the next myth, is that the dark web is massive. And as we were saying just a moment ago, the clear net is much bigger. But the biggest bit is the deep web, which we were talking about a moment ago, which is the bit with all the academic records and, hidden banking portals and all this sort of stuff. The deep web accounts for the largest amount of the internet as we know it, but you just can't see or access it. Well, the only bits you access are like, your online banking portal.
So we know that accessing the dark web is not illegal. And we know that it is used by cyber criminals, but just in the same way that the main part of the internet is used by cyber criminals. And we also know that there are some useful things in the dark web. Now, the big question is, I suppose, at this stage, do we need the dark web, really?
I would say yes, definitely. It's an important service for many, many people.
Mm-hmm.
If you are living in places with, government oppression, then it could be an absolute lifeline. Even if you are just more privacy concerned in Western countries, we've had the revelations about, government spying schemes and all that sort of stuff in the last 5 to 10 years. So if you're privacy minded, you might want to use the Tor browser over other options. The Tor browser itself isn't the best daily driver for internet access because of the way it's configured. It breaks certain bits of websites and it makes certain parts of websites just completely useless. But for many people, like I said, it's a very important tool to remaining online and remaining secure online.
So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen.
The dark web
is there. It's available for you to use. If you have privacy concerns for your location, then it might be the option that you need to use the internet access services without detection. Hopefully we've managed to answer all your questions about the dark web, distinguish it from the deep web for you, explain how it's different from the standard web that we use day to day. And now you know how to access it and what to look for during your first visit there. You're listening to the really useful podcast, the Tech Podcast for Technophobes from makeuseof.com. You will find us on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts and Amazon Podcasts or Amazon Music Podcasts. I'm not sure what that one's called at the moment. And Spotify and indeed anywhere else that you can find podcasts. Until next time, it's goodbye from us.